June 6, 1944. A 56-year-old brigadier general stepped off a landing craft into the gray water of Normandy. He had a cane in one hand, a pistol on his hip, arthritis in his joints, a heart that his doctors no longer trusted, and behind him, an invasion plan so detailed that thousands of men had spent months rehearsing it 1 minute at a time. The plan said this landing craft should be at Utah Beach. The plan said the exits inland should be directly ahead. The plan said the first wave should seize those exits before the beach filled with men, trucks, guns, tanks, radios, medics, fuel drums, and panic. But when Brigadier General Theodore Roosevelt Jr. looked through the smoke, the shore did not match the map. The landmarks were wrong. The road exits were gone. The beach in front of him was not the beach he had studied. The spearhead of the American assault had landed in the wrong place. Not a few yards wrong, not a harmless drift, nearly 2,000 yards south of the intended zone. In that moment, one of the most carefully planned operations in military history had already broken, and the second wave was coming in behind him. Roosevelt had minutes, not hours, not a conference, not a radio debate with officers on ships offshore. Minutes. He could try to move the men north along the beach, across open sand, under German fire, toward a plan that existed only on paper now. He could halt the following waves and create a floating traffic jam of landing craft offshore. Or he could do the thing no staff table in England had authorized. He could accept the mistake. He could turn the wrong beach into the real beach. The invasion of Utah Beach was about to be decided by a man leaning on a wooden cane. And the question was brutally simple. When the map is dead, who has the nerve to stop obeying it? Utah Beach looked easy from a distance. That was the trap. Unlike the cliffs at Pointe du Hoc or the bluffs at Omaha, Utah did not rise like a fortress from the sea. It was low, flat, and almost gentle, a long stretch of sand, dunes behind it, and farmland beyond. But German engineers under Field Marshal Erwin Rommel had turned that farmland into a weapon. They opened locks, they dammed streams. They flooded the low ground behind the beach until pastures became a saltwater swamp. For an army trying to get off the sand, the flooded land was worse than a wall. A wall could be blasted, a minefield could be cleared, but a drowned field could swallow trucks, tanks, guns, and men until the entire landing stalled in place. There were only a few usable exits through it. Narrow causeways, raised roads running inland like thin strips of dry bone across a flooded body. Those causeways were not details. They were the invasion. If the first wave did not seize them quickly, everything behind the first wave would pile up on the beach. Infantry, engineers, medics, radios, artillery, supplies. All of it trapped on sand that German guns could begin to measure and punish. So the plan for Utah Beach was built around precision. The 4th Infantry Division would land on a specific stretch of coast. Engineers would clear specific lanes. Tanks would swim in at a specific time. Naval guns would suppress specific batteries. Aircraft would strike specific defensive positions, and the 1st Infantry would move straight towards specific exits before the Germans could recover. It was not just a plan, it was a clock. Every gear had to meet the next gear. Every minute had a job. Every landing craft had a place. To make that possible, Allied planners used control vessels and guide craft to mark the way in the dark. Their mission was to anchor in the correct positions and lead the assault boats toward the correct sectors. But the channel did not care about the plan. In the pre-dawn blackness, current pushed the landing craft south. Smoke from the bombardment smeared the horizon. Navigation broke down. One small error multiplied into another. And by the time the ramps dropped at H-hour, the first wave had not found the planned beach. It had found a different one. Roosevelt came ashore with the 8th Infantry Regiment. He was the only general officer in the first assault wave on D-Day. His superiors had not wanted him there. He had asked more than once. He was too old for a first wave, too famous to lose cheaply, too physically damaged for a job that belonged to younger men. But Roosevelt understood something most commanders only pretend to understand. A plan does not fail politely. It fails in noise, in smoke, in water up to a man's chest, in officers opening maps that no longer mean anything. When he reached the sand, the first reports came in fast. The landmarks were wrong. The assigned causeways were not visible. Compass checks confirmed the drift. Men who had spent months memorizing one beach were standing on another. The problem was not simply that they were lost. The problem was that the invasion behind them did not know it. More landing craft were already committed. The second wave was following the first wave's path, and every minute spent correcting the error increased the chance that the entire assault would jam, split, or bleed out at the waterline. This is where command becomes more than rank. Rank can repeat the plan. Command has to read the moment when the plan has become dangerous. Roosevelt did not immediately run for a radio. He did not gather men around a map and argue with a coastline that had already won the argument. He walked. With his cane digging into the sand, he moved forward through the dunes and looked at the ground itself. The beach was not what the plan expected, but it was not useless. German resistance here was lighter than intelligence had predicted for the original zone. The flooded inland terrain still existed, but Roosevelt found a route that mattered more than any missing landmark. A small road, a usable exit, not the one the planners had built the assault around, not the perfect artery on the maps, but real, visible, there. That was the difference. The original causeways were correct in London. This road was correct on the beach. Roosevelt came back to the officers gathering in the confusion. Some still wanted to recover the plan. Some were trying to understand where their units were. Some were looking at the next wave approaching and realizing that hesitation itself was becoming a decision. Roosevelt cut through it. He pointed north with his cane. That was where they were supposed to be. Then he pointed inland. This was where they were. The old plan had assumed the landing zone would create the mission. Roosevelt reversed it. The mission would create the landing zone. They would start from here. Not because here was perfect. Because here existed. Because men were already dying here. Because the second wave was already coming here. Because a usable exit in front of him was worth more than a perfect exit on a dead map. Then Roosevelt did something that turned a mistake into a system. He stayed at the waterline. As landing craft from the next waves came in, officers hit the beach confused. Their maps were wrong. Their unit lanes were wrong. Their mental picture of the battlefield had collapsed before they fired a shot. And there in the surf stood a general with a cane, not hidden in a command post, not waiting for the confusion to solve itself. Right there, directing traffic in the open. Men came ashore looking for orders. He gave them direction. A tank commander rolled down the ramp and found Roosevelt pointing toward the inland road. A jeep driver came off the beach and received the same answer. An infantry officer, map useless in his hand, was told where the enemy was and where his men were going. It was not heroic theater. It was operational medicine. The beachhead was bleeding confusion, and Roosevelt was stopping the loss. The calm mattered. Fear spreads through crowds faster than orders. So does certainty. On a beach where units could have dissolved into scattered groups of wet, exhausted men, the sight of a senior officer standing in the open created a new truth. Someone knew what was happening. Someone had decided. Someone had turned the wrong place into the place. That is why his choice worked. Not because the mistake was small, not because the plan no longer mattered, but because he changed the plan fast enough for the rest of the machine to follow. Engineers shifted to the new exit. Infantry pushed inland. Naval support adjusted to the beachhead that actually existed. Follow-on waves stopped trying to land on an idea and began reinforcing a fact. A vast invasion system, built over years, pivoted around a decision made in minutes by one man on sand, and only later would the Americans understand the strange gift hidden inside the error. The original Utah landing zones had been logical. That was exactly the problem. German defenders had studied the same coastline. The most obvious exits were watched. The strongest positions were arranged to punish the places an invading army was most likely to use. Had the first wave landed exactly where planned, it would have run straight toward exits that German artillery had every reason to expect and prepare for. But the current had carried the assault south, out of the planned lane, out of the rehearsed geometry, and, by accident, into a weaker part of the defense. The current did not save Utah Beach. It only created the possibility. Roosevelt saved the possibility by recognizing it before it disappeared. Because an opportunity is not an advantage until someone is willing to abandon the plan that says it should not exist. A few miles away, the opposite lesson was being carved into Omaha Beach. There, American troops landed much closer to the sectors assigned to them. There, the plan's precision delivered men into a coastline that had not been softened enough against German defenders positioned on high ground with clear lines of fire. At Omaha, the first waves were cut apart. Tanks meant to give cover were lost or arrived late. Officers were killed. Units became leaderless. Men clung to shingle and obstacles while bullets swept the sand behind them. By noon, the difference was almost unbearable. At Omaha, the Americans were still fighting to survive the beach. At Utah, the landing was moving inland. The casualties at Utah were shockingly low for an amphibious assault of that scale, under 200 for the 4th Division on D-Day. At Omaha, the cost rose into the thousands. One force had landed nearly where the plan sent it, and nearly died there. Another had landed in the wrong place, and succeeded because one commander understood that obedience can become a form of blindness. Roosevelt would not live long after Normandy. A little more than a month later, his heart failed in France. He was later awarded the Medal of Honor for what he did at Utah Beach. But the deeper lesson of that morning did not end with him. It moved inland. It followed the armies. It appeared again in a completely different form, not as a cane on a beach, but as steel strips in a pasture. Because D-Day had solved only the first problem, getting ashore. The next problem was harder in a quieter way. Keeping the army moving once it was ashore. The Allies had air superiority over Normandy, but aircraft are not free creatures. Every fighter is tied to its base by fuel. The farther the front moved from southern England, the more time pilots spent crossing water and countryside before they even reached the battle. A P-47 Thunderbolt could not loiter forever. Every mile of advance stretched the invisible leash. More time flying to the front, less time protecting the soldiers there. More fuel spent going and returning, less fuel for combat. A successful breakout could create its own danger. If armored columns raced across France faster than airfields could follow them, the troops on the ground would outrun their air cover. The army would advance into the space between its courage and its support. And in modern war, that space kills. The old solution was permanence. Build a real air base, concrete runways, fuel depots, repair shops, barracks, anti-aircraft defenses, a fixed installation strong enough to last. That was how Germany thought about airfields. They were fortresses of aviation. Powerful, engineered, defended, mapped, and immobile. But permanence has a price. A permanent airfield announces itself. It can be photographed, measured, bombed, returned to again and again. It must be defended because it cannot simply vanish. The Allies needed something different, not a fortress, a tool, not an airbase built to endure, an airstrip built to be used, repaired, packed, and moved. Within days of the landings, engineer aviation battalions began pushing across captured ground with bulldozers, graders, trucks, picks, shovels, and rolled surfacing. Their battlefield was not always a battlefield in the dramatic sense. Sometimes it was a pasture, a strip of dirt, a field behind a hedgerow, a patch of French ground that, in the morning, had cows or shell holes in it. By evening, it might have survey stakes. By the next day, graders, then surfacing, then fuel drums, then mechanics, then a fighter coming in low, wheels dropping, pilot looking for a runway that had not existed when he took off. At Saint-Pierre-du-Mont, known to the Americans as Advanced Landing Ground A1, engineers turned captured ground near Omaha into one of the first forward airstrips in Normandy. This was not the old idea of a base. There were no grand hangars, no cathedral of concrete, no illusion that this ground would matter forever. The value was speed. A runway good enough to land, refuel, rearm, and get back into the air. Good enough now. Good enough where the army needed it. That phrase sounds small until you realize it was revolutionary. Good enough now beat perfect too late. The material changed with terrain and availability. Square mesh track, prefabricated surfacing, pierced steel plank, the famous Marston mat. The principle was the same. Turn difficult ground into aircraft ground fast. Steel planks could be carried by men, locked together, and laid like a hard skin over soft earth. Holes reduced weight and helped drainage. Interlocking edges let teams build a surface that could take the pounding of fighter aircraft. A runway became less like a monument and more like equipment, something issued to the front, something consumed by the campaign, something that could be repaired with sweat instead of rebuilt with months of concrete. The crews who built these fields were not glamorous soldiers in newsreels. They were engineers. Many had learned earth-moving in the hard civilian years before the war. They knew the language of soil, grade, drainage, weight, and time. Their machines were Caterpillar bulldozers with improvised armor. Their front line was a strip of mud that had to become flat while artillery was still close enough to interrupt the work. They filled craters, cut hedgerows, dragged rollers over torn ground, unloaded mats by hand. worked by headlights when daylight ran out. And when an aircraft finally touched down, the landing was not just a landing. It was a strategic fact. The air war had moved. The fighter's leash had shortened. The army below had just regained minutes in the sky, and minutes in the sky could decide whether a German column moved, burned, or never left the road. Then the idea became a rhythm. As the front advanced, an engineer unit maintained one field while another prepared the next one farther forward. A fighter group might fly a mission from one strip in the morning and return to a different strip by evening. Ground crews moved by truck. Fuel followed. Ammunition followed. Anti-aircraft guns followed. The airfield did not wait for the campaign to come back to it. The airfield chased the campaign. And when a strip was no longer useful, it was not mourned. It was stripped. Mats were lifted. Sections were stacked. Trucks carried the metal forward. The old runway became the raw material for a newer runway closer to Germany. The base was gone because the war had moved. To German intelligence, this created a problem that looked almost supernatural. A reconnaissance aircraft could photograph a field and find an American runway where maps showed only farmland. A strike could be planned, fuel could be allocated, bombers could be risked. The attack might even damage the strip, crater the surface, twist steel, scatter equipment, and then, days later, another photograph might show the field repaired or empty. Not defeated, empty. The fighters were already operating from somewhere else. The target had been hit after it stopped being the center of the system. That was the part German commanders struggled to read. They were used to air bases as fixed assets. Destroy the base, weaken the enemy. But the American system had changed the meaning of a base. A single strip did not have to survive. The network had to survive. And the network survived by refusing to stand still. You could bomb the runway. You could not bomb the method. This was the same lesson Roosevelt had lived on Utah Beach, translated into logistics. The plan is useful until reality changes. The position is valuable until the war moves past it. Strength does not always come from holding the correct place. Sometimes strength comes from changing places faster than the enemy can punish you for leaving. The idea reached its largest form in the Pacific. There, the distance problem was not the English Channel. It was an ocean. The islands were not gentle French pastures. They were coral, jungle, volcanic rock, heat, rain, and Japanese fire. On Guadalcanal, Henderson Field had taught the Americans what an airfield meant when everything depended on it. Marines and engineers fought to keep that strip alive under shelling and air raids, patching craters, because without that runway, the island itself could be lost. Henderson was survival. Normandy was movement. Together, those lessons became something bigger on Tinian. When American forces captured Tinian in 1944, engineers did not simply repair an airstrip. They remade an island. Bulldozers cut down hills. Earth movers filled low ground. Coral was quarried, crushed, graded, and compacted. The island became a machine surface for the B-29 superfortress. Northfield and Westfield rose from the reshaped ground with vast runways long enough for the heaviest bombers in the American arsenal. This was not disposable in the simple sense. It was the opposite. A permanent forward platform created by the same industrial impatience that had made the temporary fields possible. Do not wait for the perfect base. Build the base the campaign needs. Fast, where it matters. At the scale required. In Europe, that meant runways that could disappear. In the Pacific, it meant turning an island into an unsinkable platform. Different surfaces, same philosophy. The war would no longer be chained to the old idea that air power lived only where concrete had been poured long before the battle. The ground itself could be converted. That is the hidden thread between the man with the cane and the men with the bulldozers. Roosevelt did not win Utah Beach by ignoring the plan. He won because he understood the purpose behind the plan better than the paper did. The engineers did not win the airfield race by building weaker bases. They won because they understood the purpose of a base better than concrete did. A beachhead exists to get an army inland. An airfield exists to put aircraft over the fight. If the assigned beach cannot do that, use the beach that can. If the permanent airbase cannot follow the army, build one that can appear, work, and leave. The enemy can prepare for a place. It is much harder to prepare for a process. By the end, this was one of the quiet truths behind Allied power. Not just more ships, not just more aircraft, not just more factories, but a frightening ability to reorganize reality at the front. A wrong beach became the right beach because a commander made it so. A pasture became a runway because engineers refused to wait for permanence. A strip of steel became air cover. A bulldozer became strategy. A cane became command. And the German system, so proud of precision and permanence, kept looking for the thing to destroy. The airbase, the runway, the position, the marked target. But the most dangerous Allied weapon was often not the thing itself. It was the speed with which the thing could be replaced. That is why the strongest structure in the war was sometimes not made of concrete. It was made of decision. A decision to move before the old position killed you. A decision to build before distance strangled you. A decision to trust the ground under your feet more than the perfect lines on a map. On Utah Beach, the map was wrong. In the fields of Normandy, the runway was temporary, and in both places, the same truth held. The side that survived was not the side with the perfect plan. It was the side that knew exactly when to leave perfection behind.